Previously on Rebuilding the Past.
We're going to have to let go of some people for a bit because of the budget.
I have to take into account the actual financial restrictions.
Is there any hope for this?
I think there's always hope.
It looks stupid. It doesn't work as a building.
You realise that's a large portion of a tree coming down, and it's based on good Roman models.
Welcome to the Butser Roman Villa in Hampshire, the first authentic Roman villa to be built in Britain for 1600 years. And this is the team who have been working on it for a year. Now that the villa has a roof, volunteers and specialists have been brought in to handle the remaining tasks. But putting the roof on is taking a lot longer than expected. The head of the villa project, Di Morgan-Evans, is anxious that the roofing team do things exactly the way the Romans did, and authenticity is eating up the hours.
Any surprises, any nasty little bugbears that are hiding in the system? I mean, it all looks very good to me, but surely something's gone wrong somewhere. This is a cursed site, after all. What do you think about these joints? I mean, they do look extremely crude. Just looking at that, I mean, flat cut, not even sort of recessed, just nails banged into it. That's proper Roman carpentry, is it?
As far as we're aware, yeah, that's what we're led to believe, that Roman carpentry was very, very crude indeed, very simple. And you know, whereas in sort of medieval carpentry and so on,
yes,
you'll find that they rely very heavily on mortise and tenon joints.
Yes, and pegs going through them.
Yes, and very sort of quite refined joints. You know, here it's simply cut and nailed on.
So it's crude, extremely crude,
yeah,
but then actually very highly effective.
Crude and effective, but not quick. We know from excavated sites what sort of joints the Romans used. And it's these models that the roofing team are following.
It's a bloody miracle that we got this right first time, I tell you.
The roof has changed the dimensions of the villa, and the team have to re-evaluate their plan. They were so preoccupied with building the walls and the floor plan, they never thought to look up. But now he has had time to focus on it, Di has realised that the villa has room for more than one level. Of course, that has left Christine Shaw, Butser's director, to try and figure out how to stretch her dwindling resources even further. Upper stories mean more labour, more materials and more costs. Not to mention more scaffolding.
Well, it's either that or it's some sort of board.
The design for the Roman villa is constantly being reassessed, and as with most experimental archaeology, much of it is guesswork.
Experimental archaeology has an enormously valuable part to play. When you physically have to rebuild something with bricks and mortar, then there is no fudging. You have to ask every single relevant question in order to be able to create the simulation. And that requires a hell of an amount of research, and often it poses questions that you would never dream of.
The blueprint for the Butser Villa came from a nearby excavation, Sparsholt. But like most archaeological sites, little is left after 2,000 years. Only the mosaic floors on which the team plans to base their own. The question is how? One of Britain's most eminent experts is working on a Roman villa excavation not far away from Butser. Di has brought Christine, Mel and the team's newest addition, Julie, down to meet him. Mel will be assisting Julie, who is a bit of a find for the team. She comes from a long line of mosaicists, and it'll be her task to turn Butser's floors from mud to mosaic.
Wow.
Right.
That's amazing, isn't it?
This is an amazing site. I think the two things I hope we're going to get out of this today is, first of all, the mosaics. Here we've got this very well-preserved mosaic. A villa which stands out in floor plan. You can see the walls and things like that, but hardly anything else. And it's the problem we come across time and time again. What's above these first few centimetres? And this is almost a classic example of the whole thing scalped off just above the level of the floors.
Dr. David Neal has sketched nearly all of the excavated mosaics in Britain.
David, what are the actual different coloured tiles made of? How did they get the different colours?
Well, most of the material that you see here is natural, local stone, indigenous to the area. This is Pennant. Now, I think the nearest outcrops in Gloucestershire, Somerset, and the Forest of Dean, where you get a lot of this. So that's probably the one stone that's travelled the furthest. Obviously, the circle here is perfect, but you notice the interlaced square that it's sitting in is clearly not, because you've got a wider space here than you here. Here we've got 5 tertiary. Yeah. Here you've got 9, and then on the north side you've got 2. So
you have to compensate all the way around.
That's right. They're always making mistakes.
The team are basing their designs for the mosaic on the one found at Sparsholt.
I seem to remember, having drawn the mosaic in situ when it was found, that the setting was very precise and the tesserae quite sharp. Sometimes the tesserae and the laying out are not so neat, but the ones at Sparsholt are very neat indeed, well worked, well crafted. So I'm hoping that the recreation is going to reflect that quality.
The mosaic, preserved here at the Winchester Museum, was one of the few things that remained intact from the Sparsholt excavation. For Butser, the good news is, at last they've got something complete to work from. The bad news is that it puts the pressure on them. It'll be more obvious if they get it wrong.
Right, David, we've got the ultimate challenge for you, which is the Butser new mosaic.
Right.
And I'd like you to give your honest opinion on it.
My God.
So, unroll the mosaic.
Right.
If you take that.
Right, well,
This is the central panel.
My immediate reaction, absolutely immediately, is that the guilloche is far, far too wide for simple guilloche. You may have guilloche like this in 1st century Fishbourne, but you do not have it on 4th century mosaics. So this guilloche has got to be reduced by at least 4 inches or 3 inches. So what you do is increase the size of this panel and reduce the size of this to say 5.5, 6 inches. But you never have guilloche this wide.
The colours for the centre are quite simple here.
I don't howl at that. If you made it larger, it would be even more acceptable.
We've got a panel that's based again on a motif from the Sparsholt mosaic.
And I think I know what one. You've got the right angle Z pattern, which again is too big.
Size isn't everything, David.
No, but if you're going to recreate a mosaic, you might as well get the proportions right.
Point taken.
They knew David Neal was an expert, but they didn't know he'd be so exacting.
Yeah.
Probably it'd be a good idea to have a slight gap, 1 or 2 tesserae, between the circle and the border of this pattern.
Of having a line of alternate red and black, as does occur on the Sparsholt.
You would never get that on a Romano-British mosaic.
No.
No. Can I just comment on this, because this is not right? Can I draw on this?
Yes, of course.
That shape will be better, like so. Then that shape then comes into its own. Okay, that's okay. So this looks a bit too medieval in shape.
Well, I'm very glad that the suggestion was made that if David didn't have the time, we would do it and then ask him to comment, because I think that would have been far worse than asking you to comment now.
The villa reconstruction is an enormous undertaking. You know for a certain fact that you're going to run across so many people who are going to say, well, you got that wrong. And it's possible, yes, some bits are wrong, but it's as good a shot as anybody's likely to be able to make of it, I'd have thought.
People feel very strongly about their belief in what they're doing, and they get very attached to their particular ideas about how things worked and so forth, based on their own experience.
Despite the criticism, the team are pressing forward. One of the things they're more confident about getting right is the wattling. Wattling is another method of building walls, using thin rods of hazel in an interweaving pattern. The Romans understood sustainable forestry. 2,000 years ago, the Romano-British builders could well have been collecting materials from this very location.
Different areas with it would be coppiced at different times. So like, you'd go around and you'd take all the 3-year-old growth out, and then maybe you'd leave other bits for a couple more years, and then take out those bits. And the bits that you've cut down 3 years previously would have started growing again. And you just keep on doing that in rotation.
This is brilliant. This is sort of the 2-year-old stuff you've been cutting. And see how compact and tight it is compared to a loose bundle like that. So this is the sort of stuff we're going to want for that fine weaving in the panels of the villa. This is one of Simon's bundles. Simon can't carry as much as the rest of us, so he puts, oh, what's that? That must be about 8 rods in there. Well done, Simon. And this feels like one of Tom's. Tom overloads it for all of us.
Di has asked Professor Millett, the villa's academic consultant, to come down and inspect their progress. Everything is changing, and they want to consult the oracle.
Now that door is really wide.
Yes. But it's on the Sparsholt model.
That first impression as you look in the door is not what I'd expected at all. I understand it when we look at plans and you say they're quite wide. If you think about the way that, you know, one of your tenants or whatever would come up to the door and
touching forelock,
touching forelock, you can imagine the sort of person sort of sitting in the back there in their chair to receive them. Almost in like royalty.
Yes.
And that door really does make a statement.
Yes,
doesn't
it
Very
does.
Exciting.
So Martin, you say it's big. Is it Roman?
It seems to me that it works very well, and although it's not classical in the sense of somewhere in the Mediterranean, it has that sort of big, sort of open feeling, which I think is perfectly what you'd expect.
Yeah.
Julie has had to redesign her mosaic on the advice of Dr. Neil. Now she's got to see if it'll pass muster with Professor Millett.
In the centre we have a head of series surrounded by a wreath of Emma wheat representing the farm here, within a circular guilloche. Then we have corner motifs which are based on those from the Sparsholt mosaic. And we've now, I think, decided we're going to have this intervening motif.
Well, that looks really nice. It's a very Romano-British sort of feel to that. Did David Neil like it?
Well, this is a redesign. He had a few comments on the first design, and we've redrawn it to fit in with his comments.
That looks sort of appropriate. Is the door central?
More or less.
So the head of series will be facing the door or facing the principal couch?
Well, what would you suggest would be best?
Well, I think it should face the couch. I think they're supposed to be seen from the principal diner's position.
Professor Millett has been advising the team throughout the year, but this is the first time he's stood in the nearly complete villa. And even he is coming up with questions that he hadn't thought to ask before. Yet again, talk turns to upper stories.
The idea that comes to me with this is that we perhaps ought to think about that area there as being a sort of raised platform with a floor over it and balustrade or something along, accessed from here. So this becomes, instead of being sort of square room, it becomes much more like a medieval hall.
You've got here within what one would think is a single-storied building, you've got the ability to fit in 2 stories in terms of function without any fuss or trouble whatsoever.
By having that at a slightly higher level, you create a much bigger space that makes things feel very different.
What, more upper levels? Martin Millett's suggestion will mean more building, more plastering and more time. And they only have 8 weeks left before the money runs out. When will people stop dreaming up more jobs to do? For the first time, the team are beginning to get a sense of the spaces in the villa, and everything is changing. Professor Millett and Di have suggested that the villa should have upper stories on each end, creating even more work for the build team. But no one's complaining. The place is beginning to feel more like a home and less like a building site.
I've had a few friends that have come down. I've always said, look, come down to the villa, come down to the villa. And all they've seen is just like flint walls. And they're like, yeah, flint walls, nice. And now they're seeing it, and they're just, everybody that's come along is just, jaws just dropped wide open. They just can't believe it. Everybody wants to live in there basically now. Me first, though. It's taken us close to a year to get the flint walls up to 6 foot, and now within just a few weeks we can extend it another 4 foot by just using this hazel.
We know from waterlogged excavations that the Romano